who came up with this business model? Is there somebody that you guys say, well, the founder of this business model was John Doe, who used to be XYZ, and he taught us to do this because it worked back in the whatever hundreds? Is there somebody that invented this system, or was it purely accidental?
Well, empire, the idea of forming empires is as old as, modern, sort of modern history. It's as old as history, basically. But the real turn happened in Iran in the early 1950s. So when Mossadegh that gets elected president, and again, very much like Jaime Roldos, he ran on a platform that said, the oil companies, we need the oil companies here, but they've got to pay a fair share of the profits they make in Iran to the Iranian people. And the British and the Americans were the oil companies in play here, especially the British company, the company that became BP. And the British did not have a relationship with Iran, so they called on the Americans. And it was Eisenhower. Well, first it was Truman. Truman refused to get involved, and then Eisenhower became president. He got involved, and he tried to convince Mossadegh to change his ways, but it wasn't happening. Now, Eisenhower, ex-military general, was very afraid of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And Iran borders the Soviet Union. So he didn't want to send troops in because he was afraid that the Soviets would respond by sending their own troops in, and it could escalate to a nuclear war. And so he got together his Secretary of State and his head of CIA, who were the Dulles brothers, the infamous Alan and John Foster Dulles. And they came up with this plan. And the plan was that they identified a CIA agent, a card-carrying CIA agent named Kermit Roosevelt, who happened to be Teddy Roosevelt's grandson. And Kermit Roosevelt was sent off to Iran literally with suitcases filled with dollars and a few friends, a few assistants. And they launched this huge campaign to discredit Mossadegh. And they bribed the police, they bribed hoodlums in the streets to go demonstrate in the streets, they bribed the press. They used this money to convince the country that, or at least to convince our country, to convince the world in a way that this prime minister was very unpopular and that he was a Soviet puppet, that he was a communist. And of course, this is in a time in the early 50s when there was this huge clash between communism and capitalism, the Cold War had really begun. And so there was this, and in the United States, huge amounts of press that was paid for to say that this guy had to be taken out. And so eventually he was overthrown. And it seemed like a legitimate coup against a guy who was evil to his country. This is the impression that was conveyed to the world. And the Shah of Iran was brought in as a CIA puppet, basically, and placed on the throne, the peacock throne. And so, but this was so successful and it was so inexpensive. A few suitcases filled with dollars is nothing compared to sending in troops. And it was so safe in terms of if it didn't work, then there probably wouldn't have been war. Who knows what would have happened to Kermit Roosevelt? But there wouldn't have been a war. There was no threat of nuclear war. That it marked a turning point where successive administrations in the United States could say, now, listen, we don't have to go to war to exploit other countries. We can do it economically. There was one problem, and that was that Kermit Roosevelt was a card-carrying CIA agent. If he had been caught, it would have been very embarrassing for the CIA, for the US government. So very shortly after that, the decision was made to use private consultants like me. To do the
So
it wouldn't implicate the US government.
Got it. So this is why when you went to your NSA interview, they said, we may not hire you, but you may work with one of the companies that we are in partnership with.
Exactly. And that became a very common practice.
Now, let me ask you, how many times did the NSA throw companies like that under the bus saying we had nothing to do with it? We had no business with them. Was it pretty common practice to throw the companies under the bus once somebody screwed up?
Well, we always knew that they would do that if we screwed up, but I don't know how many that actually happened to, because I think in general, we were pretty successful. People in my position were pretty successful because these heads of states of these countries had damn few options, really. I mean, they knew the options.